today we have Kourtney White with us. Hello, Kourtney.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Uh,
Absolutely.
you're you're a former Minnesotan, right? At
I
this point?
am, yes. Yes. I moved to California like 2 weeks ago. So, but I was born and raised in Minnesota. So,
Nice. Well, I am excited to hear about your decision and like your path and how you ended up out there. I'm sure a lot of us can make assumptions, but I'd love to hear your story. But first, we've got our big question that we got to just get out of the way to get to know you a little bit better outside of just the film aspect that we're here for. So, Kourtney, what is a fun, interesting, special talent or skill that you have that others may or may not know about?
yes. So I guess I don't know that this is necessarily a skill, but it's more of like a fact. But like, I really, really love spicy food. So whenever I like go to a restaurant, I always get like the spiciest thing I can. Like last night, I got ramen and there was a spice level that was like, what, are you insane? And so obviously I had to get that one, and it was very spicy. My eyes were watering, but it was really good. So yeah.
That is a skill because I have thought, and we're going to lose listeners on this. I have thought pepper was spicy before. So honestly, like that is a skill and I'm jealous of it because spicy food smells amazing. And then the moment I can't do it. So I'm jealous. That sounds
Yeah.
awesome. What's your favorite like spicy like dish?
Hot wings,
Mm,
traditional hot wings.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
so jealous.
I'm sure you can find some nice places out in California for that.
Yeah, I haven't found a spot yet, but I'm definitely like on the lookout.
Yeah. Well, maybe not as good as Minnesota. We'll see. Huh? You'll see. Yeah. You'll have
Yeah,
to
there
let
are
us
good
know.
wings in Minnesota.
Right.
There are
Right.
good wing places.
Well, Kourtney, I know very little about you as a filmmaker, right? So,
Yeah,
I did see one of your films from the Z Fest. I think it was 2020. Was it that one?
it was. Yep, 2020.
Wow, what a year to make a film.
Yeah, and it was right before things started happening. So it was quite an experience for sure.
Right. Before we get to that point, like how did you get started in film? What was kind of your introduction to film?
Yeah, so growing up, I mean, I've always loved film. Going to the movies was like my favorite thing to do as a child, and I'm a very like emotional like feeler. And so like whenever I would see a movie at the end, whether it was like sad or not, I would always just get super emotional and like almost like tear up just like watching the credits, because it was just like, wow, like so many people worked together to make this like piece of art. And now I'm like watching it on this big screen. And that sounds cheesy, but it's just like I've always just really been drawn to filmmaking and storytelling. And then kind of like growing up, it felt like film wasn't at the time a realistic career path, because my family didn't necessarily understand it and they had only, kind of gone by what they had heard. And then I got to college and I was a communications major, and I was like, I'm just going to take like one film class. And I took a film class and I was like, all right, this is what I'm doing. And so I literally changed my major after a semester and have been film ever since.
Wow.
That's so
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah.
So when you were really like getting into like making that decision for yourself and like this is definitely what I want to do, like understanding the emotional like aspect you have, who inspires you the most, like whether it was while you were deciding to get into film or even through like your own filmmaking process?
Yeah. So I have a couple answers to that. So I am really into like the horror and thriller genre. So kind
Mhm.
of two like writer directors that I look up to, Ari Aster and Jordan Peele, because I really love kind of like the psychological horror. I think that's just like super cool. And also like Wes Craven, like Scream is a great movie. People Under the Stairs is one of the first horror movies that I had ever seen.
Mm.
Um, Also, there is a writer director. Her name is Quinn Shepard. And when she was like 22 years old, she wrote, directed, and starred in a feature film. And I think she was like the youngest director to make it into the like Tribeca Film Festival. And so once I saw her film, it's called Blame. It was on Hulu. I'm not sure if it still is. That just like super inspired me because it was like we were similar ages, and it was like, wow, like this is so cool. Like she made it happen. So those are kind of like the three that like inspire me the most. And also like my friends inspire me. I have a lot of friends who work on films, and it's cool to see, you know, them doing their thing, and that inspires me. And yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So thriller is kind of your, that makes sense with the short film we'll get to here.
Yeah.
Because you made one called Give Thanks. That was the title.
Yeah.
With is it Krista, right?
Krista, yep.
Yeah. Yep. Tell us about that. Like, what was the inspiration for that, and then also like what was it that made that so, I don't know, the film you wanted to make, let's say. So
yeah. So it actually started a few years prior to 2020, or we started thinking about it in 2019. I participated in, it was called the INRB 24-hour film festival in Nashville, Tennessee. And my friends and I, so we had 24 hours to write, produce, edit a short film. And we had this idea of someone being trapped. And so, you know, we did it in 24 hours. So it was, you know, as good as it could be in 24 hours, but we really wanted to kind of take that concept and kind of rework it into like a post-apocalyptic kind of thriller. And I have this thing where I really love like the 1950s and just like like the style and like the vibe.
Right.
And so I wanted to kind of play with that a little bit. And I love production design. And so that was kind of very heavy in this. Was we built our set ourselves. So we had, you know, control of it, which was really awesome. And so my friend and I, Ryan, we were like, hey, we should do Z Fest. And then we got some other friends involved. And that was my first film that I worked on post college. And it had been, I used to work in like marketing and events. And so I was like, oh, like it'd be cool to, you know, work in film again. And because I had missed it. And so that's kind of how that came to be. And we filmed, and yeah.
Yeah.
Forget the rest of the question.
Well, no, that answers most of it. It's well put together. I can tell there's production design. I can tell there's you had a good camera team or camera person, you know, cinematographer. And yeah, it was just kind of, I was like, once the credits roll, like I have to know who did this. So because it was like, first, you know, short films are hard to do like bigger stories like that with, but you seem to fit it all in a short amount of time, I think. So kudos to you on that. Yeah,
thank you. I mean, I hadn't watched it in a while. And I actually watched it before this interview because I was like, I know we're going to like talk about it. And I'm so like self-critical of myself. And I'm like, oh, there's so many things that you know, why did I do that? I should have had her say this line instead, or, but it's like, you know, it's always just a growing experience. And
the filmmaker's curse. Yep.
Yeah.
I've had to abandon so many films. It's just like, I want to go back and fix things, but it's like, how much can you fix them really now? It's like,
right.
Yeah.
Totally.
What of like the films you made in Minnesota, what do you love most about filming here in Minnesota, that is?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, so a lot of the short films I worked on was during time in college. And so it was, you know, getting to work with my friends was super awesome because most of my friends are in the film department. Also, I would say Minnesota is very versatile for like locations. I mean, we have up north, I think we have like cornfields and plains and caves and lakes, and just kind of, it's very diverse. I mean, the weather there's certain times where you can't really, you know, film outside, obviously, but
free production value. No.
Right. Yeah. Film during like a blizzard. And also the people, the community. I think there's some really great local talent in Minnesota. And so it's been cool to, you know, kind of meet and work with different people in Minnesota. And yeah, I love Minnesota. It's definitely a great place.
Yeah, 100%. And that will eventually, we're going to get to, leaving Minnesota and going to a bigger pond. Still going to call them a pond, but pond. But getting back to like your film style and process and everything, what has been the biggest challenge for you that you've found as you've filmed?
Yeah. So I have two of them. So the first would be kind of what we talked about before, is I'm very self-critical. And so sometimes I get in my own head and kind of lose some of that confidence that I should have. And so that's something that I'm still working on. And I've grown a lot from when I first started and didn't even know what like a storyboard was. And I was like, oh my gosh, like what? Or a shot list. But yeah, so confidence is definitely something I'm working on. And also time. So when we were doing Z Fest, I was working a full-time job, and so was the other, so everyone was working like full-time or in college, but it was really hard to I couldn't put as much time and effort as I wanted into developing the script just because, life was busy. So I would just say, yeah, time and confidence are kind of the things that sometimes get in my way personally. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's totally understandable. I feel like that's such a relatable, stance too. Like, yeah. And just the more that you do it and the more that you realize like, you're growing and you're learning, and the next project is going to be even bigger and better. And like, it's all such a personal experience that hopefully eventually those things get better. But yeah, I totally, absolutely.
Yeah. I guess like when you're starting a new project, a film, or how many films have you made so far? I suppose I should ask first.
Yeah. So it's hard to like count. So I've probably made like 4 of my own like short films, or I've like written and directed, but throughout college, I helped a lot of people produce or first AD with their films. And then I also, my senior year of college, produced a film for my professor and mentor. And that actually got into a film festival out here in Burbank, California, which was kind of cool. And so that was like my biggest like project that I worked on, because we worked with like professional, I guess all actors are like professional, but like we worked with like our DP was a professional. And so it was basically like through this workshop, this Northwestern Productions workshop. So we took students and we took trying to think of the word for it, like actual like crew members who are working in the field, and we all collaborated. And so they mentored the students. And so I was the producer of that. And so I had a mentor that I was working with. And so that was definitely like the biggest like project I'd worked on. And I think it was like a 15-20 minute short film. And yeah, so that was also the longest one that I'd worked on.
Right. Yeah, that's a long short. I know I made like about that amount of time, 15-minute short, and someone said it's too long. It's like, but it got into a festival, so that's something. It's like, it's not like it's a prerequisite or anything. I guess like doing a project like that, or even just your own, or maybe something else you have coming up, what excites you about making or starting a new project?
Yeah. So there's a few things. So I really love like producing and like organizing things. So like I love just like setting up like a Google Drive folder and like naming all the folders and like creating like spreadsheets and like deadlines and calendars, and like that stuff is just like so fun to me. So I love like doing that when I start out a new project. If it's something that I am writing and directing and I'm not producing, I really love like going through trying to find inspiration. So like I like to sketch like random things and like write random words to get like inspiration for horror and thriller films. And also just like the kind of excited nervousness when like, you're going to shoot the next day, it's the first day on set, and you're like just super like, you're anxious, you're excited, especially if I'm directing. Like I get all these like, I just get like super like excited but nervous. And yeah, which is, I think it's a good, it's good to be nervous, because it means that you care. And yeah.
100%.
Right.
So Kourtney, I really want to dive in. I'm not going to be patient anymore. I just want to talk about what really like drove you and motivated you to decide to pick up and leave Minnesota, go to LA. What was really the kick in that for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I've always so I've been to LA probably like 6 times prior to me moving.
Wow.
And I've always been very back and forth about wanting to go. It's like, I think what was stopping me was I was scared. And then last year, stuff with COVID happened. And so it was like, oh crap, like it's not really a great time for me to move. But every time I would visit California, and like I said earlier, like I'm a feeler, every time I'd visit California, I just got this feeling, and it was just like, this is where I'm supposed to be. Like, I was so happy here. And granted, it was vacation, so that's a little different than living there,
Yeah.
Yes.
But I just had this feeling, and I was like, this is where I need to be. And finally, one of my really good friends lives out here, and then my best friend just moved out here like last month. And so I drove out with him and helped him get moved in, and was able to look at an apartment when I was here. And it just kind of, the pieces just kind of clicked, and it was like, okay, like I have friends out here. I have found a great apartment with great roommates. And so it was like, I gotta do it now. And I had this goal. So I'm 25 now. I had this like personal goal to be moved out here before I was 26. And so it was just like really cool, because it was like, okay, like, I'm like, I'm scared, I'm nervous. Everyone's like, oh, do you have a job lined up? And I'm like, nope. I'm like, I'm going out there, and I'm going to see, I'm going to see what happens. And, which is, kind of where I'm at now. And, working hard, trying to connect with people and see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like so many people that you'll listen to like podcasts or interviews or something, and it could just be any giant person. And every time they're like, yeah, no, I literally just picked up and drove to California, and I didn't have anything, and I just figured it out. And I'm like, I mean, if so many people can do that, like, it's gotta work. Like, there's gotta be something to it. Like that passion that just says, I just have to do it, rather than like pre-planning every little tiny thing. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah. And so to add to that, so my trip to get out here was so incredibly chaotic. My car broke down in South Dakota.
Oh no!
On the way here, so my good friend was with me, and broke down. It was like on the border of like Minnesota and South Dakota, but the closest dealership was in Sioux Falls, so we had to get towed to Sioux Falls. And we were at the car dealership, and we're like, okay, like it's probably fine. Like maybe it just needs, a jump or whatever. And turns out it was bigger than we thought. And I was just like in the delership, just like crying. And I was like, I'm not supposed to go out to California. Like, I just like was like, oh my gosh, like I was so heartbroken. And it ended up, my mom is an amazing human. She was like, Kourtney, you are going to LA. You are meant to be there. She drove out, and she gave me her car. And I drove out with my friend in my mom's car. And and along the way, seriously, I could probably write a screenplay based on just like the chaos of this trip. But it just seemed like all of these things kept happening, and I was like, am I meant to like go out there? Am I not? Like, I don't know. But then I was like, I am. Like, we're getting through it. And so it's an interesting story now, but yeah.
Absolutely. That does sound like it'd be a cool screenplay. You should jot that down just in case.
Yeah.
Could like merge into other ideas and things, and that would be really cool, especially with like the horror psychological like thriller thing.
Yeah.
You could make that pretty dope.
That's very true.
So you mentioned you're 25. Your goal was to do this before you're 26. So you met your goal, like your dream, living your dream.
I honestly think you could at +1 for 2020. So I mean, you can always.
True.
I mean, that's kind of like that was like a timeout, pause on the clock, Anyways,
that's
go ahead,
Very
Rohan.
good point. That is a very good point. So you're basically 24. Beat your goal by 2 years.
True. Yes.
So what would your younger self not believe about your life right now, like today?
Oh man. So my younger self would not believe that I actually moved to California. My friends and my mentor can tell you that the thoughts of wanting to move out to California, I've had these for so long, and I've always been like, I'm doing it. No, I'm not. I'm doing it. No, I'm not. And so that definitely is something that would surprise my younger self. And also, I mean, I'm someone who is kind of like, to get like a little personal, struggled with like anxiety and depression. And so those are things personally that I personally had to kind of work through and overcome and figure out how to kind of deal with that while still trying to chase my dream. And so I just think my younger self would be proud, even though I'm not, you know, the super like successful filmmaker right now. I think I'm in a place that I really didn't imagine that I would be in, I guess.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, you're very young, you're doing the thing that you want to do. You're in the place where you really can like exceptionally thrive and do it. Like 100%. I call that successful. I never moved to LA. Seriously, that's awesome.
I've
that's true.
I've tried that twice and had to come back for many different reasons. But it's a nice thing about LA is like, one, it's not really going anywhere, so it's just a spot on the map. You can always return, or like you said, you've been there 6 times, so it's like yeah.
Yeah, totally. And that's my thing. It's like, if I come out here and fail, then I go back to Minnesota, or I go to Atlanta, or I, you know, but I just want, you know, I just wanted to try.
Yeah.
At least.
you yeah, exactly. And there's no rule in life saying you can only try this once, or however many times. If you have the opportunities, you can definitely do it. So you're right, it's up to you. Also, like when you talked about like caring about people's film, like, you know, your films and everything, it made me think about like, yeah, you're really handing it off to like other people to hopefully interpret the story, like actors or the DP for your vision and things like that. When you're like, when you made that Z-Fest film, was that difficult for you to, I don't know, for me, I have some control issues, right, Rahana? Yeah. I at least, yeah.
Yeah. So the DP, so Ryan, he was the DP, and we had actually worked together before in a writer director DP like relationship, and so we'd already worked together before, and so that was kind of nice because we know, and we're also friends, so we kind of have that foundation and kind of know like how each other works. And so I was like very, very involved with everything, with like the shot listing and everything, and kind of making sure things were how we both wanted it, while also kind of, you know, obviously making sure the vision was clear and yeah.
It's filled with a lot of nuances, and then now you're out there where it's kind of a different ball game, because you have like the Hollywood system, but then you also have other actors and filmmakers who want to make stuff, right? Right. And that's why they're there. So there is kind of that indie element around Hollywood. So and you have kind of everyone and everything there. So you kind of have access to things, you know, that we don't in Minnesota. I guess with that, what's next for you out there? What's the plan? Like for you right now, maybe like what do you hope to do next?
Yeah. So right now I'm just kind of networking and letting people know that I'm out here and available for to be a production assistant on, you know, whatever I can find. And then my goal would be to work up to being like a production coordinator eventually, and just kind of see where it goes from there. My ultimate dream / goal would be to be a producer, and then to kind of write and direct on the side, like some horror films. But producing is definitely my favorite thing in film.
Great.
Love that. Do you have anything like personal projects that are like lined up at all so far, or like things that you might be in the midst of writing and trying to like work your way up to, or are you still really just focused on, hey, I just got here like yesterday and I'm trying to plant my feet?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I have some projects that I had kind of worked on before. So like my senior project that I had worked on when I was in college. I never, like, I finished it and got graded on it, but I've always wanted to like re-edit it. So I think I'm actually going to work on that kind of while I have some downtime. And then I recently just found my my portfolio from a script writing class. And so it's filled with like a bunch of short stories. And so I brought it with me to California, and I've been like reading through it, and I'm like, like maybe I could like turn these into something. So yeah, there's nothing like, there's not one like particular thing that I'm working on, but I definitely have kind of goals and intentions to work on some things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That sounds exciting. Always just having like something in the fire.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's good to network, go to events where there are, safety precautions, of course, or outdoors. But yeah, networking is key, which is kind of an interesting subject now. But but then you can actually meet up with people for like follow-ups out there.
Right.
So then it's like, that's how I did it. Like I went to an event, met people, and helped them produce a web series. So it was just like, you meet people just so randomly, and it's like, everyone's got a project going. So I think,
yeah.
And then you can build your resume on that, and everyone's working something else. And it's just like, it's amazing out there. So yeah, I understand what you mean by it's home. It feels like home. Yeah,
totally. Yeah. It's nice. Even like all the billboards are always like, film and TV related, and it's just cool to just drive through and see like the palm trees and the billboards, and I don't know, it just feels like a magical place.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Something that you had said earlier, and I'm just thinking now. So you've mentioned that like horror and psychological thriller really that's where your zone is. That's what you love. Is there a genre that maybe you haven't worked in that you feel kind of drawn to or curious about? Like, I would kind of love to dip my toe into that at all.
Yeah. So honestly, probably comedy. So two of my favorite movies are Dumb and Dumber and Tommy Boy. And sorry, it's my doorbell. Two of my favorite movies are Dumb and Dumber and Tommy Boy. And so I really love like the writing, and I really appreciate like the comedy from kind of like that era. And so I love to really like get into that. And also I think it would be cool. So another part of horror that I really like is that there's often like some comedy intertwined in it. And so I'd love to be able to kind of write that into horror films. And also like, I really love, so there's this other movie that I really love. It's called Tucker and Dale versus Evil. And it's like the horror movie, but it's a spoof. And it's just like, it's so funny. And it's also kind of scary, and it's just like, wow, like I want to write something like that. Like, it's just so cool to me. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like a comedy horror thriller, kind of like Zombieland, like that.
Yeah. Yep. Totally.
That's what Tucker and Dale kind of remind me of a little bit, but it's funny like that, like silly. I guess also just now you're part of our Minnesota group that's now in California. So it's being a Minnesotan, I guess you'll find other people from Minnesota out there too.
Oh yeah.
That's the thing. So film in Minnesota is everywhere. It's not just in Minnesota per se. So
very prevalent out there.
Yes. So it's kind of interesting that like with the podcast, you can kind of figure out like people like you, Kourtney, that are now like doing the work with, getting hopefully producer gigs with maybe a pilot or maybe, something new that's exciting. So yeah, I wish you the best of luck on that.
Yeah, thank you.
So Kourtney, where can people like find you or contact you or see some of your work, or if somebody's listening saying, oh my gosh, I need a producer and I happen to be in LA, how do they reach you?
Yeah. So I would say, so I'm currently working on like a website where I can kind of have some of my work that I've worked on. But I would say maybe through Instagram would probably be the easiest way right now. And my handle or username is Take Me to Courts, and it's Kourtz. So yeah, Take Me to Courts.
I love that.
Thanks. I
funny.
just changed it. It used to be my name, and I was like, I want to like change it to something fun. So that's what I came up with.
It's great. It's so
That
good.
is good. Sounds so serious. No. Okay, last question, the big one. Kourtney, what do you want people to remember most about you?
I've been thinking about the answer to this one. And I think I'm going to spin it into like more like advice. So I would say that I'm just a very determined person. And like, even like, you know, with the obstacles of coming out here to California and just kind of like being dedicated and just kind of knowing like, this is what I want. And so I guess I hope other people hear this and I don't know, are inspired to follow their dreams as well. And like, even if you have, you know, struggle, we all have our struggles, but for me, like I said earlier, like I didn't think I'd be here by now, like in California, and like, you know, with everything I've struggled with like mental health and just personal life challenges, it's just, I just want other people to know like that it's possible. And I don't know, to just, stay determined and just kind of know that. Oh, and also I'm going to say, I'm someone who like, when I turned 25, that hit me so hard. And I know that 25 is not old, but for me, it was like, wow, like I'm 25 and I had felt like I hadn't done enough in my life, which it sounds kind of weird, but like, I was like, oh, like I thought I'd definitely be somewhere different and more established by now. And I kind of just realized like, there's no deadline for when you have to, you know, have certain things achieved. Like it's okay if, you know, and so I think that's like the biggest thing that I want to share is just know like that it's okay. Like you'll get to where you want to be. You have time to get to where you want to be. So yeah, that was very jumbled, rambling, but hopefully I still got my point across.
You absolutely did. And I think that those are great messages because a lot of people learn those things later on. Like I'm a good chunk older than you. Listeners don't need to know specifics, but but I just got to that concept just a couple of years ago where I was like, oh, there's no like due date for all these things in life. And, you know, it's okay to still be in position A, even though everybody else is in position Z or something, you know, like it's, you live your life the way you live your life. And as long as you're living your dream or like doing what makes you happy, you're good. So the fact that you even have that message now is you're light years ahead of so many people. So it's a great message.
Yeah. Thank you, Kourtney.
Well, thank you all for listening. Thank you, Kourtney, for joining us today. And until next time, this is Film in Minnesota.